The moment you decide someone is beneath you may be the moment your entire world begins to fall apart. The courthouse in Richmond, Virginia, had seen decades of arguments, verdicts, and quiet victories. But on that gray Tuesday morning, its marble hallways carried a different kind of tension. Lawyers hurried between courtrooms with leather briefcases tucked beneath their arms. Bailiffs exchanged routine greetings. Families sat on polished wooden benches, whispering nervous prayers before hearings that could change their lives forever. Security cameras watched everything without emotion, capturing every hurried step beneath rows of bright fluorescent lights. At exactly 8:12 a.m., a woman dressed in a simple navy blazer stepped through the main entrance carrying nothing more than a slim leather folder. Vanessa Brooks walked with calm confidence that never asked for attention. Her natural curls framed a composed face, and her quiet eyes seemed more interested in observing people than being noticed herself. She smiled politely as she held the door for an elderly veteran using a cane, then paused long enough to help a young mother gather a stack of papers that had slipped from her hands. No one thanked her loudly. No one recognized her. She simply continued toward the east hallway where courtroom 4 was preparing for the day's first hearing. Several courthouse employees glanced at their watches before exchanging anxious looks. A clerk hurried past another employee and whispered, "Has anyone found Ms. Brooks yet? They said she should already be here." The words disappeared beneath the steady echo of footsteps before anyone nearby could make sense of them. At the opposite end of the hallway, Officer Ethan Walker leaned casually against the security checkpoint. His uniform was spotless, his badge polished until it reflected the ceiling lights, but the confidence on his face bordered on arrogance. He had spent nearly 15 years wearing that badge, and somewhere along the way he had convinced himself that authority meant never having to question his own judgment. Beside him, another officer quietly mentioned that important visitors were expected that morning. Ethan shrugged without interest. "People with titles always think the rules don't apply to them," he muttered. As Vanessa approached the restricted corridor leading toward the judge's chambers, Ethan stepped directly into her path. His expression hardened before she had spoken a single word. "Ma'am, this hallway isn't open to the public," he said sharply. Vanessa stopped immediately, maintaining steady eye contact. "I'm expected upstairs," she answered in an even, respectful voice. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me through." Ethan glanced briefly at the plain folder in her hand, and then back at her face. Whatever assumptions formed in his mind happened almost instantly. Around them, conversations faded. A courthouse reporter instinctively lowered her notebook. A law student waiting outside the courtroom lifted his phone without pressing record. Something about the atmosphere shifted, subtle but unmistakable, as if everyone sensed that an ordinary morning had quietly reached the edge of an extraordinary moment. Vanessa remained perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides. She neither argued nor raised her voice. Ethan took one deliberate step closer, determined to make an example of the woman standing in front of him. Neither of them noticed that high above the hallway, multiple security cameras continued recording every second while, just outside the courthouse entrance, a line of black government SUVs slowly turned the corner and approached the building. The hallway seemed to grow quieter with every passing second, not because people had stopped moving, but because curiosity had begun replacing routine. Attorneys slowed their pace without realizing it. A court reporter adjusted her glasses and watched from across the corridor. Even the courthouse maintenance worker paused beside a cleaning cart, sensing that something unusual was unfolding in a place where ordinary mornings rarely changed their rhythm. Vanessa Brooks remained composed, her leather folder resting calmly against her side. She did not fold her arms or raise her voice. Years of experience had taught her that dignity often spoke louder than confrontation. She simply looked at Officer Ethan Walker, with the same measured expression she had worn since entering the building. "I understand your responsibility," she said politely. "I am here for an official appointment." Ethan gave a dismissive smile that never reached his eyes. "Everybody has an appointment when they want somewhere they do not belong," he replied. The words were sharp enough to draw uncomfortable glances from nearby visitors. Vanessa took a slow breath before answering. "If you would like to verify my credentials, someone upstairs can confirm my arrival." Ethan barely acknowledged the suggestion. Instead, he gestured toward the public waiting area several yards away. "You can wait over there until someone decides to come get you." His tone carried the confidence of someone accustomed to ending conversations rather than listening to them. Vanessa did not move. She was not refusing an order. She was simply standing exactly where she had been instructed to report less than an hour earlier. Somewhere above them, a courthouse clock chimed the quarter hour. The sound echoed softly through the marble corridor before fading into silence. At the same moment, inside a conference room on the fourth floor, Judge Eleanor Whitman glanced once again toward the closed doorway. "Has Ms. Brooks arrived?" she asked her assistant. The assistant looked down at a phone screen filled with unanswered messages and quietly shook her head. "Security said they have not seen her yet." The judge frowned. "She is never late." Back downstairs, Ethan noticed none of this. He believed the situation was completely under control. To him, the woman standing before him was simply another visitor questioning his authority. Around the corner, another courthouse employee hurried past carrying a folder stamped with official city seals. He slowed briefly, looking toward Vanessa as though he recognized her. But before he could speak, another clerk called his name from the opposite hallway, pulling him away. Vanessa watched him disappear without saying a word. She understood how timing could change everything. Across the lobby entrance, the revolving doors turned again. Several men and women wearing dark business suits entered together, scanning the building with quiet professionalism before separating into different directions. They did not announce themselves. They did not interrupt anyone. Their presence blended naturally into the courthouse crowd, yet several experienced deputies immediately recognized the discreet earpieces beneath their collars and straightened almost instinctively. Ethan remained focused entirely on Vanessa. "You are making this much harder than it needs to be," he said. Vanessa answered with remarkable calm. "No, officer. I believe we still have an opportunity to make it easier." For the first time, Ethan hesitated for less than a second, puzzled not by her words but by the confidence with which she spoke them. Before he could respond, the faint reflection of flashing government escort lights appeared across the polished courthouse floor, visible only through the glass entrance doors, unnoticed by nearly everyone except the elderly veteran Vanessa had helped just minutes earlier. He quietly smiled to himself, as though he already knew exactly who had finally arrived. Vanessa Brooks quietly shifted her attention toward the tall courthouse windows where the morning sunlight filtered through the glass, painting long reflections across the polished marble floor. She had spent her entire career learning that patience often revealed more about people than questions ever could. Every decision, every expression, every careless assumption eventually told its own story. She had witnessed it in briefing rooms, community meetings, and internal investigations across multiple cities. Respect could never be demanded by a title alone. It had to be demonstrated long before anyone discovered who you were. Ethan Walker, however, appeared convinced that confidence and authority were the same thing. He folded his arms and watched Vanessa with growing impatience while several visitors quietly gathered farther down the corridor. Nobody wanted to interfere, but nobody wanted to leave either. Something about the exchange felt larger than a simple disagreement. The courthouse itself almost seemed to be holding its breath. Upstairs, Judge Eleanor Whitman stepped out of her chambers and looked down the balcony that overlooked the main atrium. She spotted unusual movement near the entrance as additional courthouse personnel began checking their phones. One deputy approached her with a concerned expression. "Judge, the welcoming committee is asking whether the guest has arrived." She answered without taking her eyes off the hallway below. She should have been here several minutes ago. Back near the security checkpoint, Vanessa noticed a framed photograph hanging on the wall beside Ethan's desk. It showed a group of officers standing beside neighborhood children during a community outreach event from years earlier. Ethan looked noticeably younger in the picture, smiling with genuine pride. For a brief moment, Vanessa wondered what had changed between that photograph and the man standing before her now. Had disappointment hardened him, or had unchecked authority slowly replaced empathy with certainty? She never asked. Some answers revealed themselves without words. A courthouse receptionist hurried into the hallway carrying a clipboard. She glanced toward Vanessa with the unmistakable look of recognition before hesitating as she noticed Ethan blocking the corridor. Uncomfortable with interrupting another officer, she quietly stepped back and disappeared into a nearby office. Ethan interpreted her hesitation as confirmation that he was handling the situation correctly. "You should really consider cooperating," he said firmly. It will save everyone unnecessary delays. Vanessa answered with the same calm tone she had maintained from the beginning. Sometimes delays reveal exactly what needs to be seen. The sentence lingered in the silence that followed. Across the lobby, the revolving doors opened once more. The group in dark business suits now spread naturally throughout the building, greeting courthouse administrators with polite nods, but never drawing attention to themselves. A veteran bailiff straightened his uniform almost instinctively after recognizing one of the visitors from a statewide leadership conference. He whispered something to another deputy, whose eyes immediately widened before both looked toward the east hallway. Neither spoke another word. Ethan noticed only the growing audience around him. To him, their attention confirmed that maintaining control required firmness. To everyone else, the atmosphere had become strangely different. The ordinary sounds of ringing telephones, rolling file carts, and distant courtroom conversations continued as always, yet beneath those familiar noises another feeling quietly emerged. It was the unmistakable sense that a single decision made in the next few moments would be remembered long after every hearing scheduled for that Tuesday had ended. And while Ethan still believed he was deciding someone else's future, fate was silently arranging an unexpected introduction only a few steps away. Officer Ethan Walker let out a quiet laugh that carried farther down the hallway than he intended. The sound echoed against polished stone walls and drew even more attention from people pretending not to watch. He looked at Vanessa Brooks with the confidence of someone who had never expected to be questioned inside a building where he wore the uniform. "You have been standing here long enough," he said firmly. "Either show me credentials that actually authorize you to enter this corridor or return to the public waiting area." Vanessa met his eyes without the slightest trace of anger. "My credentials can be verified in less than a minute," she answered calmly. "Please contact the administrative office on the 4th floor." Ethan shook his head before she had even finished speaking. "That is not how this works." His voice grew louder, not shouting, but loud enough for nearly everyone nearby to hear. "People do not tell me how to do my job." A young attorney carrying legal files slowed his pace and exchanged an uneasy glance with another lawyer. Neither spoke. They simply continued walking while listening carefully. An elderly woman waiting for her hearing quietly lowered the novel she had been reading. She studied Vanessa's composed expression with growing concern. It was unusual to see someone remain so calm while being challenged so publicly. Vanessa did not argue. She did not match Ethan's tone. Instead, she carefully adjusted the leather folder in her hands and answered, with remarkable patience, "Officer, I respect your responsibility. I only ask that you verify the information before reaching a conclusion." Ethan smiled again, although this time the expression carried more skepticism than confidence. "I have already reached one." Those words lingered in the air longer than he realized. Nearby conversations faded almost completely. Even the steady rhythm of footsteps seemed to slow as courthouse employees sensed that the exchange had become more than an ordinary security question. Upstairs, Judge Eleanor Whitman stood near a large conference table where city officials had begun arriving one by one. An assistant approached carrying a tablet. "Judge, the welcoming party is asking whether they should delay the meeting another few minutes." The judge looked toward the hallway visible through the security monitors. "Delay it," she answered quietly. "Something unexpected is happening downstairs." Back in the east corridor, Ethan extended one arm toward the public seating area, signaling that the discussion was over. Vanessa remained exactly where she was. She neither resisted nor stepped forward. She simply waited. Her composure unsettled several people watching from a distance because it reflected complete confidence rather than uncertainty. A courthouse deputy walking toward the elevators suddenly recognized her face. His expression changed instantly, but before he could cross the hallway, another supervisor urgently called him into a nearby courtroom. He hesitated for only a moment before disappearing through the heavy wooden doors. The opportunity quietly slipped away. Outside the courthouse entrance, the line of black government vehicles came to a smooth stop along the curb. Uniformed officers from different agencies greeted one another with respectful nods, while several officials stepped onto the sidewalk carrying sealed briefing folders. Inside the building, no announcement had yet been made, but subtle signs of preparation were everywhere. Reception staff straightened their jackets. Bailiffs checked their watches. Administrators whispered into radios. Only Ethan seemed completely unaware that the courthouse was preparing to. welcomed someone whose arrival had already set the entire morning into motion. Vanessa glanced briefly toward the glass entrance, noticing the reflections of the newly arrived vehicles across the marble floor. Then she returned her attention to Ethan and spoke with the same calm certainty that had never left her voice. "There is still time to choose professionalism over assumption." Ethan answered without hesitation. "I have already made my choice." Neither of them realized that several security cameras had captured every word, every expression, and every decision, preserving a record that would soon matter far more than anyone standing in that hallway could possibly imagine. The courthouse no longer felt like a place where strangers crossed paths without noticing one another. Every passing minute added another quiet witness to the unusual scene unfolding near the east hallway. Nobody interrupted, yet almost everyone looked more than once before continuing toward their destination. Vanessa Brooks remained exactly where she had been from the beginning, calm enough that her silence seemed more powerful than any argument. Officer Ethan Walker interpreted that silence very differently. To him, it was stubbornness. To everyone else, it looked remarkably like confidence. His portable radio crackled softly with routine courthouse updates before another voice briefly broke through the static. "Command is confirming the arrival of the visiting leadership team." Ethan acknowledged the message without paying much attention. Visitors arrived every week. Conferences came and went. Nothing about the announcement seemed important to him. A courthouse administrator hurried across the lobby carrying a folder marked with the city seal. She stopped at the reception desk and quietly asked, "Has Ms. Vanessa Brooks checked in yet?" The receptionist looked toward the east hallway before answering in a whisper, "She should already be here." Their conversation lasted only seconds, but an older bailiff standing nearby heard every word. His expression shifted immediately as recognition crossed his face. He looked toward Vanessa, then toward Ethan, clearly debating whether to intervene. Before he could move, another deputy called him into courtroom 3 to assist with a jury entering the building. Once again, timing quietly favored misunderstanding over clarity. Upstairs, Judge Eleanor Whitman reviewed the morning agenda for what felt like the 10th time. Every item remained exactly where it belonged except for one name that had not yet appeared. She placed the folder on the conference table and spoke to her assistant. "The entire leadership transition cannot begin until Ms. Brooks arrives." Her assistant nodded nervously. "The commissioner is 5 minutes away." The judge looked toward the security monitor mounted near the doorway. The image from the east hallway showed only a distant view of people gathered near the checkpoint, too small to distinguish faces clearly. Downstairs, Ethan noticed several people watching from farther down the corridor. Believing they expected him to demonstrate authority, he straightened his posture even more. "I have already given you every opportunity to cooperate," he said. Vanessa answered with the same respectful composure. "You have given yourself every opportunity to verify the facts." Ethan dismissed the statement with a slight shake of his head. "Facts begin with following instructions." Vanessa smiled politely, not because she found the situation amusing, but because she understood how quickly certainty could disappear when built upon assumptions instead of information. Nearby, the young law student who had quietly lifted his phone earlier lowered it again without recording anything. He sensed this moment deserved observation rather than interruption. Outside the courthouse, the line of government vehicles came to a complete stop. Drivers stepped out first, followed by several senior officials dressed in dark business attire. One of them checked a watch before speaking quietly into an earpiece. Moments later, the main entrance doors opened. The courthouse receptionist immediately stood. Security supervisors adjusted their jackets. Several deputies instinctively moved toward the lobby to welcome the arriving delegation. Ethan finally glanced toward the entrance, but only for a brief moment before turning back to Vanessa, convinced that the visitor everyone awaited could not possibly be the quiet woman standing only a few feet away, while the reflections of flashing escort lights stretched farther across the polished marble floor with every passing second. The atmosphere inside the courthouse shifted almost imperceptibly, like the quiet stillness that settles over a city just before a summer storm. Conversations became shorter. Footsteps slowed. Even the familiar ringing of telephones seemed less important than whatever was unfolding near the east hallway. Vanessa Brooks remained composed, her attention never wandering far from Officer Ethan Walker, whose confidence had only grown stronger with each passing minute. He believed the crowd gathering around them confirmed that he was maintaining order. He did not realize they were beginning to question his judgment instead. A courthouse clerk hurried toward the security desk carrying a stack of official documents before stopping abruptly as she recognized Vanessa. Surprise flashed across her face. "Excuse me," she began carefully, looking between Vanessa and Ethan. "Is everything all right here?" Ethan answered before Vanessa could respond. "Everything is under control. Please continue with your work." The clerk hesitated, clearly uncertain, then slowly nodded and walked away, glancing back over her shoulder more than once. Vanessa watched her disappear without saying a word. She understood that interruptions often delayed the truth, but rarely prevented it. Upstairs, Judge Eleanor Whitman stood beside the conference room window overlooking the courthouse entrance. Several senior city officials had already taken their seats around the polished oak table. Empty coffee cups rested beside neatly arranged briefing folders bearing the city's official seal. One chair remained unoccupied. It was positioned at the head of the table. The judge quietly checked the time once again before turning toward her assistant. "Please tell me someone has located Ms. Brooks." The assistant refreshed the courthouse communication system and frowned. "No confirmation yet, Judge." The judge sighed softly. She has never missed an appointment in her career. Down in the lobby, the main entrance doors opened fully as the visiting delegation entered the building with calm professionalism. No one announced them. There was no unnecessary display. The officials simply exchanged respectful greetings with courthouse administrators before moving steadily toward the elevators. A few experienced deputies immediately stood a little straighter after recognizing Deputy Commissioner Robert Hayes among the group. He acknowledged them with a polite nod before asking a single question. "Has Chief Brooks arrived?" The deputies exchanged confused looks. One quietly answered, "We believed she was already inside." Robert Hayes looked toward the reception desk, sensing that something was not quite right. Back in the hallway, Ethan folded his arms once more. "This discussion has gone on long enough," he said firmly. "If you are expecting special treatment, you came to the wrong place." Vanessa answered with unwavering calm. "I have never asked for special treatment. I have only asked for the same professional courtesy every citizen deserves." Her words settled over the hallway with quiet weight. Several people lowered their eyes, reflecting on what they had just heard. Ethan dismissed the statement with another confident smile. "Courtesy begins with following instructions." Vanessa gently nodded. "And professionalism begins with verifying the facts." Before Ethan could respond, a courthouse radio transmitted an urgent but controlled message that several deputies heard at once. "Attention, all security personnel. The commissioner is requesting immediate assistance locating Chief Vanessa Brooks. Last confirmed arrival was at the main entrance approximately 15 minutes ago." The words echoed softly from more than one radio throughout the hallway. Ethan froze for only an instant before convincing himself the announcement had nothing to do with the woman standing before him. Vanessa remained perfectly still, her calm expression unchanged, while, at the far end of the corridor, Deputy Commissioner Robert Hayes turned the corner, his eyes immediately searching the crowd until they settled on one familiar face. Deputy Commissioner Robert Hayes did not hesitate after recognizing Vanessa Brooks. He walked directly through the gathering crowd with the quiet confidence that came from decades of leadership, and the conversations around him faded almost instantly. Deputies who noticed his approach instinctively stepped aside. Courthouse employees straightened their posture. Even Judge Eleanor Whitman, watching through the security monitor upstairs, leaned closer to the screen as if she already understood what was about to happen. Officer Ethan Walker turned toward the approaching delegation with a polite professional smile, assuming they had arrived for the scheduled leadership meeting. Before he could offer a greeting, Robert Hayes stopped directly in front of Vanessa. Without the slightest hesitation, he extended his hand and smiled warmly. "Chief Brooks," he said with genuine respect, "we have been looking everywhere for you. Welcome. Everyone upstairs is waiting." For a single heartbeat, the hallway became completely silent. No footsteps, no whispered conversations. Only the distant hum of the courthouse ventilation filled the air. Ethan's expression changed almost instantly. His confident posture stiffened as he looked from Robert Hayes back to Vanessa, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what he had just heard. Vanessa accepted the handshake with quiet grace. "Good morning, Commissioner," she replied. "I apologize for the delay. There was an unexpected misunderstanding at the security checkpoint." She spoke without anger, without accusation, and without raising her voice. Her calm professionalism somehow carried even greater weight than outrage ever could have. Robert Hayes followed her gaze toward Ethan. His expression remained composed, but the warmth in his face faded into quiet concern. Around them, courthouse staff exchanged stunned looks. The receptionist covered her mouth in disbelief. The young law student who had watched the encounter from the beginning slowly lowered his eyes, realizing he had just witnessed a moment that would likely be discussed throughout the courthouse for years. Upstairs, Judge Eleanor Whitman smiled with visible relief as she watched the monitor. "There she is," she said softly. "Now everything makes sense." Within seconds, several additional senior officials reached the hallway. Each greeted Vanessa with unmistakable respect. One after another, they welcomed her to the courthouse, congratulated her on her appointment, and addressed her by her official title. There could no longer be any uncertainty. The quiet woman who had patiently stood in the hallway while every assumption was made about her was, in fact, the newly appointed chief of police for the entire department. Ethan felt the certainty he had relied upon all morning begin to disappear. He replayed every word he had spoken, every conclusion he had reached without verification, every opportunity he had dismissed. None of those moments could now be taken back. Vanessa looked toward him with the same composed expression she had carried from the beginning. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, no desire to embarrass him before the growing crowd. Instead, there was something far more unsettling: disappointment. After a brief silence, she spoke gently. "Officer Walker, I asked only for verification. The facts were always available." No one answered immediately. The truth itself had already spoken louder than anyone in the hallway possibly could. As the doors to the conference elevator opened nearby, and the welcoming party prepared to escort Chief Vanessa Brooks upstairs, every person present understood that the most important lesson of the morning had nothing to do with rank or authority. It was about the consequences of judging someone before taking the time to learn who they truly were. The elevator doors closed behind Chief Vanessa Brooks and the senior officials, but only for a moment. Before the car began moving, she quietly pressed the button to hold the doors open. She turned back toward the hallway where Officer Ethan Walker still stood, surrounded not by accusations, but by the uncomfortable silence that follows undeniable truth. Deputy Commissioner Robert Hayes noticed her decision and nodded with quiet understanding. He knew that the next few minutes would reveal far more about leadership than any ceremony. Waiting upstairs, Vanessa stepped back into the hallway with the same calm dignity she had displayed since arriving at the courthouse. Every eye followed her. The marble corridor that had felt so ordinary less than 30 minutes earlier had become a place where assumptions had been replaced by reflection. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly before meeting hers again. The certainty that had defined his voice throughout the morning was gone. In its place was the unmistakable realization that every decision he had made had been based on conclusions rather than verification. Robert Hayes addressed the gathering in a measured voice. "This courthouse is equipped with comprehensive security recordings. They document every interaction that occurs within these public areas." His words were not spoken as a threat. They were simply a statement of fact. Several supervisors exchanged brief glances before one quietly contacted the department's Professional Standards Division. Department policy required an objective review whenever questions about professional conduct arose, regardless of rank or assignment. The same standards applied to every employee. Vanessa looked toward the supervisors and spoke with calm authority. "Please make certain the review follows established procedure. Every person involved deserves fairness, complete documentation, and the opportunity to be heard." Her response surprised several people standing nearby. Some had expected immediate discipline or public criticism. Instead, she insisted upon the very principles she believed every officer should uphold. Fairness did not become less important simply because the outcome appeared obvious. Ethan listened carefully. The words struck him harder than any public embarrassment could have. Throughout the entire encounter, Vanessa had never insulted him, never challenged his dignity, and never attempted to use authority to gain personal satisfaction. Even after revealing her position, She remained focused on protecting the integrity of the institution rather than her own pride. Judge Eleanor Whitman entered the hallway moments later and greeted Vanessa warmly before turning toward the assembled courthouse. Personnel. Professionalism is measured most clearly during moments like this, she said. Titles matter. Policies matter. But character matters even more. No one argued. The truth had become impossible to ignore. A supervisor respectfully approached Ethan and explained that, consistent with department policy, he would be temporarily reassigned while the incident was reviewed. Ethan quietly acknowledged the instruction without protest. For the first time that morning, he listened before speaking. As another officer escorted him toward an administrative office, several courthouse employees reflected on how differently the day might have unfolded if one simple verification call had been made. The security cameras had preserved every moment, but they had also preserved something deeper than evidence. They had captured the difference between assumption and professionalism. Vanessa watched the hallway return to its normal rhythm as attorneys resumed their conversations. Families continued toward their hearings, and courthouse staff returned to their responsibilities. Justice had not arrived through anger or revenge. It had arrived through patience, truth, accountability, and the quiet strength of a leader who understood that real authority was never demonstrated by proving someone wrong, but by showing everyone how to do what was right. Later that afternoon, the conference room overlooking the courthouse was filled with officers, city leaders, judges, and department supervisors gathered for the official leadership transition that had been scheduled long before anyone realized how unforgettable the morning would become. The atmosphere was respectful but noticeably reflective. Many of the people seated around the room had already heard what had happened in the hallway, yet no one seemed interested in rumors or blame. They were waiting to hear from the person whose actions had quietly transformed an uncomfortable encounter into a lesson that would outlast any formal ceremony. Chief Vanessa Brooks stepped to the front of the room without dramatic introduction. She thanked Judge Eleanor Whitman, Deputy Commissioner Robert Hayes, and the courthouse staff before looking across the audience. Her voice remained steady, calm, and unmistakably sincere. "Every badge represents a promise," she began. "It is not a promise that we will always be right. It is a promise that we will always seek the truth before reaching a conclusion." The room remained silent. Every word carried the weight of experience rather than criticism. She continued, "This morning reminded all of us that professionalism is measured long before anyone learns a person's title. Respect cannot depend on appearance, assumptions, or expectations. It must be given because every person deserves dignity." Several officers slowly nodded in agreement. Judge Whitman smiled quietly, recognizing that the most important speech of the day had nothing to do with appointments or promotions. It was about restoring confidence in the values every public servant had sworn to protect. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Walker sat in a nearby administrative office completing the initial paperwork required for the formal review process. For the first time in many years, he replayed an ordinary conversation and recognized how many opportunities he had ignored to ask one more question, verify one more fact, or simply listen before deciding. The realization was uncomfortable, but it was honest. He understood that accountability was not the end of a career. Sometimes it was the beginning of becoming the person the badge had always expected him to be. Over the following weeks, the department completed its review according to established policy. The security recordings, witness statements, and documented procedures were evaluated carefully and fairly. Recommendations focused not only on individual accountability, but also on improving training, communication, and professional standards so that similar situations could be prevented in the future. Chief Brooks insisted that every conclusion be supported by evidence rather than emotion because lasting trust could only be built through fairness. Months later, new recruits entering the police academy were shown a presentation about procedural professionalism, respectful communication, and unbiased decision-making. No names were highlighted for embarrassment. Instead, the instructors emphasized one simple principle: verify first. Assume nothing. Treat every person with equal respect. Those words became part of the department's culture because they had been learned through experience rather than theory. As the sun began to set beyond the courthouse windows, the marble hallway looked exactly as it had at the start of the day. Lawyers hurried home. Custodians prepared the building for another morning. Families left carrying hope, relief, or uncertainty after their hearings. The building itself appeared unchanged, yet everyone who had witnessed the events understood that something meaningful had happened within those familiar walls. Authority had been tested, character had been revealed, and the strongest voice in the entire courthouse had belonged to the person who never needed to raise it. Because in the end, a badge may grant authority, but only integrity earns respect, and the day you choose truth over assumption is the day justice begins to wear its strongest uniform.